Hey folks, I'm just going through comments on YouTube and wanted to get to one from the Improver. I don't know if I got all the O's, but I think that's approximately it. So they said, currently an engineer in the military, but my contract is finishing up and looking to hop into a startup. My perception is 80 plus hour weeks of work, but is that reality? It sure seems like it on X or Twitter. I have no issue with working that much, assuming the job/mission is fun and interesting, but are these people actually doing productive work for that long? So, interesting question. I'll share some of my perspective and opinion on this. Also, found another comment that from someone that said, not on the same video, I don't think, but I just wanted to share it because it's awesome. Something along the lines of, this was drivel, and then I'm a profoundly shitty person, and they're glad that they don't work for me. Well, thank you for your comment. If you have questions that you'd like answered, leave them in the comments below, or send a message to Dev Leader. That's my main YouTube channel and my social media handle. If you submit your questions on other social media platforms through messages, I'll keep you anonymous. Happy to do that. If you leave them in the comments, they're all public, so I'm not keeping you anonymous. And if you want to leave me super shitty mean comments too, usually I post them on Twitter for people to go, oh man, like look at that. So you can check out the mean crappy comments on my Twitter, because they go right to there. Okay, because I'm profoundly shitty. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, I work at Microsoft right now for the past roughly 5 years. It'll be 5 years in August. And before that, though, I worked at a startup. Then I started at that startup when it was about 7 people and grew to around 250 by the time I left. So got to kind of do the whole startup scaling fun times thing. So I will always try to remind people in my videos that like everything I talk about is from my experience, right? I'm not telling you this is how it is everywhere all the time. I can't do that. It's impossible. And it would be wrong. So all that I can do is share my experience, and then where possible, try to call out bias and explain, like, here's why I see things some way, and maybe it could be different. So, to this person's question about 80 plus hour weeks of work, that's how I worked when I was at a startup. What I will add that's important to note is that no one made me work like that at the startup. The founder and the CEO, so 2 different people. So the CTO was the founder and the CEO was the CEO, the co-founder, or I guess you'd call him co-founder. It wasn't really the founder. So there's 2 people that own the company basically, and neither of them at any point was like, hey, you better work longer. What they did that I thought worked really well, and I don't think that it's common, and I want to make that clear. I don't think it's common, but what they did really well was they had a really solid mission, because we were building digital forensic software. We were helping law enforcement, investigators, examiners solve crimes. We were often, like, one of the most common use cases, which is very unfortunate, but very sort of rewarding to be part of, is for what's called CSAM. So I don't want to say it particularly on YouTube. I don't know if I'll get flagged or whatever, but it's basically for children. So we were helping save children in some of the darkest types of crime situations that you can imagine. So very powerful mission to be part of that. And so they had that. And then what they did, and I thought was the other part that worked really well, was that they offered a lot of autonomy. So it was like, we have this really important mission in front of us. Here's the direction we want to move in as we work on that mission, and we trust you. So go ahead. And when I've spoken about my experience, when I was an intern, I had 6 internships. I had 2 full years of work experience as an intern. I want to say it was probably a shitty intern. Not because I produced bad code. And I shouldn't say it was that. I wasn't bad. I didn't have the work ethic and the interest that I have today. So I would get in on time, leave on time if I could, maybe a little early. Like I had no interest in being there in any of my internships. Even if they were like kind of cool, it was like I'm a kid, I want to play video games, I want to be with my friends. I had no desire to be better at what I was doing while there, and just wasn't interesting. And it flipped completely once I had graduated and worked at this startup as my first full-time job. I went from being like time to rush home and play video games to like I'm going to keep working. I'm going to go to the gym from work, and when I'm done at the gym, I'm going to keep working. And no one made me do it. So I got very, well, yeah, I got lucky. Some people would say that doesn't sound lucky. It sounds like you're being forced to work too much. No, like I loved what I was doing. I loved it. No one made me do that, and I still did it. Now, they also compensated me, not per hour, or else I would have retired, because I worked a lot of hours. So they compensated me well. I felt like I was treated very fairly. Like I said, I had a lot of autonomy and a powerful mission, so I just kept working. So, to this person's question, like, you know, are you actually doing productive work for that long? Like, there's a couple different angles to this, right? Because there's a follow up question or comment from someone, Arbiter of Life, responded and said, "Honestly, I doubt past 50 hours much productivity is actually happening." I understand the idea here, right? Because I could say, to give you a different perspective, I have over the past, let's pick on Microsoft for a second, right? Like I could absolutely imagine working 80 hours in my current environment at Microsoft and being like, how much productivity is happening in those 80 hours? The efficiency would be reduced. It's not to say that I couldn't find a way to work an 80-hour week at Microsoft and be efficient. I'm just saying, like, based on how my current work weeks are, there's enough stuff that is like dependent on other people, different time zones. There's so many moving parts that have like all these dependencies that the nature of things kind of slows down. And when you're doing more things in parallel to compensate for it, there's a lot of context switching. You get inefficiencies. When I was at this startup, there was so much to do all of the time, either putting out fires, trying to rapidly prototype the next thing that we could go try. There was so much to do that, like, I can say with confidence, there was a lot of productivity, like working out, weeks like that. Now, I understand what the person's saying, though, right? Like, if you're going to be working so much, where's the balance? Now, like I said, I feel like I got lucky because I really, really liked what I was doing, and I realized that's not the normal thing. So let's talk about the bias here, right? That's not the normal thing. Let's pick a different example, right? So I'm building Brand Ghost on the side, which is my social media content scheduling platform. That's being done like after hours, like when I have time to do it. And even with that, so that's not 80-hour weeks. Even with that, I have had periods of time, and I rely on this for all of my content creation. I've absolutely had points in time over the past year where I'm like burnt out from it, or like I'm trying to work on stuff and I'm like, man, I think I'm just refactoring code and moving stuff around, and like that's not a good use of time. Like the productivity's not there. And like that's come up normally. So I think like it's always possible to have these situations where we say, based on an amount of time, you pick 80 hours, 60 hours, 40 hours, almost regardless of the time you're putting into it, you can have these periods where it's not like an effective use of time in any of these situations. But I personally, my experience led to, in this startup environment for me, it was always like, there's a lot of stuff that can lead to productivity. I would say if there were If we didn't have all those ingredients that I talked about, which is like, solid mission, treated like in terms of compensation, treated fairly, and then autonomy, like those are sort of the ingredients for me. If one of those ingredients was missing, and I'll tack on something else in a moment, but if one of those was missing, it probably wouldn't have been as sustainable. It eventually wasn't, because I did this for years and then had problems with like social anxiety because I was just working. So it was like sustainable from the perspective of like, I'm not sick of work, but I traded everything else in my life, which is not okay. That's going to lead to this other part that I wanted to mention, was like, those are the ingredients for making me like be productive at work in this startup environment. But another sort of ingredient that needed to be I don't know a good way to say this. The ingredient analogy is not working, but basically because I didn't have other responsibilities at that point in my life, I was able to do that. I got to work and I wanted to go to the gym. I had I paid off my student loans quickly. I was able to get a car that wasn't in shambles from high school and had a place to live. So I bought my own place and I had my mortgage payment. I didn't have a girlfriend, and any girlfriends I had were like it wasn't like a sustainable thing or whatever, probably because I was working a lot. But like, wasn't in a long-term relationship, didn't have a wife, didn't have kids, right? So I didn't have responsibilities outside of work and going to the gym. So for me, the gym was one thing I would never trade, right? I made sure every day I went to the gym. I'm not saying that's necessarily good. You need rest days and stuff, but I just like going to the gym. That was one thing without compromise. It was like, you want me to, like, if someone was like, we need you to work late, I would be like, oh, I don't care. I'm going to work anyway, but I got to go to the gym. You schedule whatever you want with me anytime. As long as I can go to the gym, I don't care. That was my responsibility. Now, I had to change that later, and I ended up getting a dog, who's Lila. I think she's 10 years old now. But I got my dog Lila. So if we do the math on that, 5 years at Microsoft, so 8 years at Magnet, so like three-ish years in, 3 to 4 years into Magnet is when I got Lila, because I was like, holy crap. I've just like literally I've only been working for these 3 to 4 years. I haven't done anything else. And I started to notice the social anxiety and stuff, right? So I got a dog because that was my strategy for like, you need a responsibility that pulls you out of work. And it was the best decision I ever made, right? I've said this before and I'll say it again, Lila has absolutely saved my life. She was in one of the Code Commute videos a few weeks ago now. She like came in, I was filming in here and she like came in, and then she like lied down in the corner and was being kind of funny. But the productivity part was never an issue for me. So if some of those ingredients were different, I could see that being the case. If I had responsibilities outside of work, right? Getting Lila meant that I had to do I had to go like leave at lunch to go see her, to make sure I was home after work to go see her. So it pulled me away from work. But if I had like children, or if I had a wife and I'm like, look, like those are higher priorities in my life, then I'm, in terms of if I was forced to go work, right? So now it's like, no, like you need to be here. And I'm like, yeah, but I got a wife and kids. Then I would feel like I'm now forced to work. Now all of a sudden my productivity, not going to be the same. If I wasn't given autonomy. I've learned this about myself. If you remove the autonomy from me, I will burn out instantly. Because the way I generally am working is like I am like full tilt. I am maxed out on everything I could possibly be doing. And it's because there's a lot of things that I do that I enjoy. But as soon as you take away the autonomy, because I'm already like almost redlining, you take away autonomy and I'm instantly like, I don't like this and don't want to do it at all. I've learned that about myself. So That's an ingredient I need. If I'm feeling like I'm not being compensated and someone's like, yeah, but you got to work more. No. Maybe earlier in my career that would have been different because I'm like, okay, I guess this is how it is. But at this point in my career, if someone was like, by the way, you have to just start working more and we're not compensating you more, I'd be like, that's nice. Like, I guess I'm applying to other jobs. So I think what I'm getting at with the productivity part and the hours worked is like, I think the productivity would plummet relative to hours worked if some of those pieces were missing. And I think that is actually common for most people. The reason I wanted to walk through my experience is because I feel like I had stars align for my job, and that's why I had that experience. So I share it because I want to say, like, it is possible that you can have that. I will also say that was one of the places where, people are like the cheesy, like, oh, we're a family. I'm like, it felt like a family too. Like, it was, like I said, it felt like the stars aligned at that place. So when most people go through this, and for someone to say, yeah, but probably after 50 hours a week, there's not a lot of or the productivity drops, probably for most people, right? So I would say after your 40 hours, like your 9 to 5, I would say probably your productivity drops somewhere after that. Because if that's your normal working habit, maybe for this person that was saying that they're from the engineer in the military, I don't know. Maybe based on their experience, maybe they're already kind of acclimated to working more. So I think that's another part that's individual, right? Depending on who you are, how you've been operating, if you've acclimated to just doing more work, then maybe, yeah, you can be productive more. Right? Like, if you're just used to doing it, then probably. But for, say, if the average person's working their 38 and a half to 40 hour work week, and then suddenly they're tossed into something that's like 60 hours, 80 hours, yeah, probably not unless they're like in love with it. So that's my perspective on it. If it wasn't obvious, I will just say it again to make it very clear that, like, your mileage can and will vary, right? I shared with you my experience. I tried to give you some other perspective. But I think those are the things I would consider, right? You have to understand for yourself what's going to be motivating you to work. Because when some of those pieces are missing and then you need to work more, it's probably going to feel like absolute trash. So, everyone's going to have a different experience. So hope that helps. If you would like to be like the other person that left me mean comments and stuff, and I'm terrible human being, you don't want to work for me or with me, that's cool too. But again, if you have questions that you want answered, I would be happy to try and help. I'm just trying to be helpful. So leave them in the comments below or send a message to DevLeader. And I'll see you next time. Take care.